Welcome back to the Four Gardens podcast. I'm Jake Ipshin. In this episode, we'll continue to focus on health, which is the first of the Four Gardens. My guest today is Victoria Wolfgang. Victoria is a yoga teacher, IPEC certified wellness coach, artist, and writer. She has bachelor's degrees in both biology and psychology, and has always been fascinated by the mind-body connection. Her passion for movement practices such as martial arts began as a child, and in 2015, she discovered that yoga helped her find relief from chronic social anxiety and sensoriomotor challenges related to childhood trauma and undiscovered autism and ADHD. Today, Victoria is passionate about continuing to devote herself to studying and teaching the ancient insight practice of yoga and helping other neurodivergent people find self-acceptance and holistic wellness. In our conversation, I was grateful to learn more about autism and ADHD, and I feel better resourced on how to support people in my life who are on the spectrum. I was also inspired to hear Victoria's perspective on yoga, how to find wisdom and balance in my practice. As always, I'm joined by Ari Rubens, who's my co-host and co-producer of this podcast. Ari, what were your thoughts on this episode?
Well, first off, I met Victoria a couple of years ago at various places, but officially in a park, and we were doing acro yoga or acrobatic yoga. Before I know it, I'm lifting Victoria up with one arm straight in a pose called side star. So just holding her hip like this. And from that moment onwards, I always saw her as someone very fearless or maybe courageous in that sense. And I've always admired that about Victoria. And so I think she really brought that element to this podcast as well, sharing something and some parts of her story she hasn't really opened up with as much. And so it's just so beautiful to see someone show up with courage, and she's done it on this podcast. So I'm so excited for you to listen.
Thanks, Ari. I also met Victoria through conscious dance and remember having really powerful dances with her, just admiring her as such an embodied yogi and dancer, acro yogi. And I think it's common too, just in the last episode, a recent episode with Yona Levy and other teachers in the community, I see people's really most powerful self-expressing. So I'd always experienced Victoria's confident, powerful side, and to hear a more vulnerable story too of some of the hard times she went through growing up with autism and ADHD, and how she navigated that was really beautiful. I was grateful to get to know her better and understand her full experience in a more balanced way. And I know you'll enjoy out there too. The audience will enjoy getting to know Victoria. Let's jump right in. I want to jump in by asking you about autism and ADHD. I've seen you and read your writings about this, seen your posts, and I want to hear more about your experience with autism and ADHD and how it's been in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just a couple of things that might be helpful for listeners to know before I fully dive into my story. One is that Asperger's or Asperger's is a common term you may have heard before. And it's a term that they used to use for what they thought was a mild form of autism, which isn't really a thing because autism is a spectrum. But I bring it up because it's a term that people probably know, and it's what I would have been considered if I was discovered to be autistic years ago. But it was determined to be pretty arbitrary and not actually useful, so it's not really used anymore. But I wasn't discovered up until very recently, and that's because women and girls with autism and people who are identified female at birth actually present very differently than men. Women are much better at mimicking behavior and masking their autistic traits in order to hide their autistic neurology and fit in better with different groups of people. So for a long time, it was believed that girls didn't, quote unquote, get autism. But that actually isn't true. We now are seeing that the levels are actually quite equal. Most girls just aren't getting discovered. And that's because Hans Asperger, the man who studied and created the criteria for autism, actually only studied, or for Asperger's rather, only studied young boys when he was coming up with this criteria. I like to use an example here a lot that one of my favorite autism advocates, Jennifer Cook, talks about. She talks about how heart attacks for a long time, we only knew the signs of heart attacks in men because similarly, we only studied how it shows up for men. So up until very recently, women would be coming to the hospital with real signs of an oncoming heart attack and they were being turned away. And the same thing is happening for women and girls right now around autistic neurology. So I think that's really important to understand. And finally, the last piece is when I talk about autism, I'm not talking about a disorder. This is a personal preference around languaging. It's kind of different for every person on the spectrum, which is fair. And I don't really police language a lot. I think it's hard to talk about something you're not educated on yet if you're afraid of getting it wrong. But I do think it's important for people to know that I don't feel like anything is wrong with me or that this is a disorder. It's just a difference in my brain. But before I discovered that I was autistic, I definitely did think that there was something wrong with me. So that kind of leads me into the story. I started speaking in sentences much earlier than most kids my age. My mom told me that recently, and that's actually a sign of autism. But it's not one that people were very familiar with because the other sign is having late speech development. And that's one that doctors tend to, or clinicians tend to recognize more so than the early speech. So I always felt like something was really different about me when I was younger, but I kind of figured everyone felt that way. And it wasn't until middle school that I began to really notice differences in a negative way. This is a time when neurotypical people or allistic people who are not autistic, are naturally developing the ability to communicate in more complex and subtle ways. So you might not realize it if you're not on the spectrum, but human interaction actually operates with a lot of reading between the lines. There's a lot of subtle body language and unspoken rules that are easy to pick up on for allistic people, but it doesn't happen so quickly and easily for us. By comparison, autistic communication is much more direct and to the point. We often say exactly what we think without filtering it at all. And this is why the stereotype of the man with Asperger's who's really rude or abrasive exists. And it's also why sarcasm can be really hard to understand. And this is the case for me. I was bullied a lot when I was a kid. I remember people seeking me out because they knew how gullible I was to kind of make fun of me and make that like a show for other kids. It might seem like a small thing, but the frequency with which it happened really led me to believe that I must be stupid. And I began to equate my worth with my appearance over my intellect or my personality, which maybe I can talk about more later if we have time.
Yeah, I'm sad to hear you're a bully, but also not surprised thinking about you're divergent, like you're diverging from what's normal or what's normal and typical, neurotypical. And so noticing that it's not bad or good, that in some ways, it's different. Like you were able to speak these clear sentences from the beginning, early. You have these different development of language, different development around social cues that I'm not surprised that it led you to be misunderstood, because I think divergence can also just mean different, and with all the benefits and challenges that might come along with difference. And so,
yeah, I think anytime you're not part of a majority, right? Like we decide what is normal based on what is most common, but that doesn't mean that you're actually abnormal. You're just different, right? So
that's something I want to track throughout
Totally.
this conversation. Learning about it though too is just what stereotypes I have about people with Asperger's, autism, ADHD, because certainly I'm sure many of us, I can speak for myself, I have an image of an autistic man when I think about autism, like you're saying, that my awareness is a product of mainstream media narratives about it or cultural narratives. And I don't have a female face that I put to autism, which is one reason I'm really inspired to have this conversation with you too, because I think you put a really compelling face and voice to this for me, and I think for others too. So I'm just tracking that as I go along of how I can be more nuanced and understanding about the divergence, I think, and how it can look for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think that's the reason why I wanted to push myself to stretch and come on and talk, because I think it's really important for people to see the different ways that it can look, because we only have of one idea of how it looks. And for me, finding this out about myself has been super super life changing. So if it can help somebody else figure it out, I wanted to contribute to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll help me, and I hope others too. Like, I'm setting another intention for this conversation is thinking about how people can be supportive too of people that are neurodivergent. And so that's just another. I think the awareness for me seems like it comes first. I want to just understand and listen, and
Mhm.
then I can think about what might be supportive to make someone feel more included or more seen or more met in those spaces. So yeah,
Yeah. Um, well, kind of going back to what you said about, I think just simply understanding, like having more knowledge is super super helpful. Um, and going back to what you said about women not really seeing the face of a woman when you think about somebody with autism or Asperger's. Um, it's one of the reasons for that is because while it is much more socially acceptable for a man to speak without filters, to kind of speak his mind, um, it's a lot for women and girls because of the way we're socialized, and also because of women developing emotional intelligence and maturity a little bit earlier in youth than boys. We become much better at hiding our differences, and instead of, like, for me, for example, I grew to be very very quiet because I figured out early on, without knowing why, that that I was doing something wrong socially. I didn't know exactly what it was. But for example, like info dumping is a thing that we do a lot, on topics that we're interested in. So talking for too long a length of time without realizing it, saying something socially off without something that's honest, but you're supposed to kind of hide the truth a little bit. But it's hard to know those rules if it doesn't come naturally to you. So instead of kind of maintaining that sort of way of interacting, I became very quiet, and I started to just agree with everybody, and not really speak my mind anymore, because speaking my mind was dangerous, and usually got me into problems. And I started studying other people through TV and in person to learn how they interacted, and kind of having these social rules in my head at all times about make sure you make a certain amount of eye contact, don't talk for a certain length of time, which and many many more, which worked because people, if you're not super educated about autism, you probably wouldn't know. But it also is extremely, extremely exhausting. It takes a lot of mental energy. Instead of doing it naturally, I'm like constantly thinking about this, and that's one reason that a lot of people who don't know they're autistic struggle a lot with anxiety, meltdowns, sometimes physical symptoms as well, which I had for a really long time. So, yeah, understanding why that's happening can be really life changing.
I can imagine that, and just hear how that uh, not just the outer targeting, the bullying. I mean, I'm sure that just adds to all the problems, but just the hiding alone sounds like the sounds really stressful to me and lonely. I think to imagine to hide like that too. And yes, I'm just feeling for you on that too, and thinking about how those differences, if understood better earlier age, could be expressed, could be worked with, but the hiding makes it so much harder. It sounds like
Mm-hmm.
for those years.
Yeah, no, it is probably, I would say, one of the most difficult aspects of being autistic and not knowing about it is more so just the the not fully being, always feeling like something is wrong with you, and not fully um but especially if you're good at masking, then it kind of, you appear on the outside quote unquote normal to everybody else, and so it's like almost like this self gaslighting thing that's going on. um Because for me, I can keep it together usually when I'm with people, but then it would be when I was alone that I would just break down, total exhaustion, total meltdown, burnout. What I thought was panic attacks for a long time, I eventually learned was actually autistic meltdowns. So, so yeah, the masking is as we call it in the community, is probably one of the most difficult aspects of like hiding your true self.
So you're having these hard experiences due to the masking, due to missing people or getting targeted. What started to help you? What, like you're having these experiences in middle school. Talk about what supported you in these times.
Yeah, so I started martial arts when I was really, really young. My mom brought me into it. I didn't want to do it at first, but then within, I think, like 3 days, I became totally obsessed with it. And I think that there's an aspect of that and just like body awareness that was really, really helpful for me. It helped me, people on the autism spectrum, as well as people who are ADHD, often struggle with like really racing hyperactive thoughts, like thoughts that constantly go. And if you have a mind like that, you know how exhausting it is. So embodied activities can really help to quiet the mind, especially martial arts and yoga are both kind of focused on the body-mind connection. So that definitely was helpful. And I think I was kind of it was like therapeutic for me long before I knew what it was actually doing for me. And then later, if we skip to adulthood, it was my friends that first kind of started pointing some stuff out to me about my behavior that helped me realize that I first discovered that my ADHD traits, and then later that led to my official autism diagnosis. Something that I think is really interesting to share that I wanted to share with people, because most people don't know that ADHD and autism are actually super, super highly related. They are genetically related. So if you're ADHD, then I can almost guarantee you someone in your family is probably autistic, whether they know it or not. And 1 in 3 people with ADHD traits also show signs of autism. And I have both traits as well, which can be confusing because they can seem contradictory. But they actually are kind of like different expressions of the same difference in neurology. So, for example, autistic people are tended to be thought of as people who really like sameness and order and routine, whereas ADHD, the stereotype is liking novelty and newness. And I experience both of those things in different ways. So if my morning routine, which is my yoga practice now, it really grounds me and helps me be in the world in a balanced way. If that's disrupted, it can be very difficult for me to like adjust. But at the same time, I really love to travel and like be in new places, and I get antsy if I'm in one place for too long. So I just jumped on a tangent there, but I thought that was an interesting thing to share with listeners who might not know.
That is interesting. And I want to also go deeper into the mind-body connection, because I know that becomes a theme for your work and your life, is exploring that later in your studies and in your practices. And how particularly, though, for somebody with autism and ADHD, based on what you just described to those characterizations, does having a centering practice like martial arts or yoga really serve them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to talk specifically about yoga and how it can be helpful, because it's so dramatically helps me in my life. And one important thing to note is that neurodivergent people are often highly sensitive. We have highly sensitive nervous systems often. And so things that are good for us and our health are really good for everybody. It's just that we tend to experience like the negative effects of certain things sooner because we're more sensitive. So like fluorescent lighting, not getting enough time in nature, like not getting good nutrition often will affect us sooner and more strongly than it will for others. So the things that I'm going to share are true for everyone, but this is what makes them kind of especially helpful for people with neurodivergent neurology. So yoga helps relieve excessive tension in the body, and if you are constantly overstimulated because of your sensory overload, because having a highly sensitive system, then you probably carry a lot of tension in your body. I definitely did before I started practicing that. I slowly became aware of, realizing how often like I held my jaw super tight or clenched my fist without realizing it. It also increases your proprioceptive awareness, which is your awareness of where your body is in space. And it's very common for people who are on the spectrum or who are ADHD to have a hard time interpreting the signals in their body. So this leads to forgetting to eat, clumsiness and injury, being oversensitive to pain or undersensitive to pain, which all of these things can cause issues, right? And it also can lead to something called alexithymia, which is struggling to identify the emotions that you're feeling. And that's because our emotions are super, super related to our physical sensation, our physical feelings inside our body. So if you have a hard time noticing your sensations, your feelings inside, then you'll probably also have a hard time with emotions. There's a great book on this called How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Barrett, I believe, if you want to dive deeper. But in that way, but yoga, by connecting people to their internal feelings, can really help connect with the emotions that they're feeling and identifying those. And that was true for me. I was always a very emotional person, but I often couldn't like understand what the feelings were. They were just so big and overwhelming. And we know yoga is not just about the body too, right? So authentic yoga increases us to, connects us to our breath, and helps us improve focus, which is especially helpful for ADHD traits people, and to quiet the hyperactive mind. So yeah, I could keep going on and on forever, but there's a lot of benefits to it.
We're definitely going to get into more yoga talk too. That's something I'm also
Cool.
passionate about, is yoga and meditation. We'll get into it, and I want to learn more about your practices. But I want to reflect too how relatable some of the challenges of clenching the jaw, the emotions.
Mhm.
These are things I experience and I'm working on
Right.
in my life too, and so it doesn't feel that different. And just sometimes the heightened sensitivity of someone who's neurodivergent can just be a really, like, talking to them or learning from them, just being in relation to them is a good reminder to me to do all the self-care things that you described, and even more understand the why behind them too, because the sensitivity that you're experiencing is really, or the more extreme manifestation of it for you, can be really instructive for me. And I'll just give an example from an earlier podcast. I had Sasha Bugler on, who lives with bipolar disorder, and talking about her extreme emotions and the cycles she goes through, led me to reflect on, I also live with cycles in my life of up and down, and her extreme cycles. Still, it was instructive to think about someone who's living with something more extreme, or a more extreme version of my own feelings. So I think that's just one of the takeaway for neurotypical or people who aren't ADHD or autistic listening to this, is that there's just so many. Our experiences are all at the core related to each other, and are like, so our differences are a lot smaller than our similarities, I guess, when it comes down to it, and they're very critical too to understand. So I just wanted to reflect on that for a minute.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great point too, because yeah, the intention too, and like understanding if you are on the spectrum, like the difference is just like to kind of have words to talk about and explain why. Like for a long time, I just felt like I was super being oversensitive about everything, but in actuality, like you said, it can really help just connect you to the things that are normal, natural needs for all people. And I also think like a lot of people, it's what makes a lot of people on the spectrum really great, like space holders or like in the helping and wellness fields, because they had to probably work so hard in order to overcome some of that stuff themselves, then can help like guide other people in ways to like find health and wellness in those ways.
Yeah, I mean, the intention of this season is all about health, right? So of these group of episodes, and I think too that the practices that you teach and share are much more than just for people with autism and ADHD. But it also sounds like you do end up, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but you do end up because of the way you experience them, have a special sensitivity or niche to be able to help certain types of people, and also, but help everybody. Like you said, would you say it made you a better space holder too in certain ways later because of these experiences?
Yeah. Was that a question? Did you say, say it made me?
Yeah. Would you say like particularly these early experiences with
Mhm.
ADHD and autism, or even up till now, how this awareness has helped you help others, I guess, is part of something I want to track in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the reason, even though I didn't find this out about myself until about like a year and a half or so ago. I think it's like always been the underlying thing that has like put me on the health path, the wellness path of like trying to do all of this healing and understanding self-discovery work. It was this, right? But then understanding it has been has been transformative, because I no longer am feeling like I am trying to fix myself. I think I was trying to change things that weren't changeable, and now it's kind of working with my unique neurology. Something else that I think helps me as like a space holder, teacher, working with people in like the movement realm, is I have mirror touch synesthesia. A lot of people on the spectrum have synesthesia, which there are different types. It's kind of just like where two senses go together. So like some people might see sound, but a mirror touch synesthesia is when you feel sensations in your body when watching other people be touched or move. And it's also highly linked with empathy, having high levels of empathy. So I think that for a long time was very overwhelming. It felt kind of like a curse. And I didn't know what it was, of course, right? But being overwhelmed by like what I would feel around other people, but learning to tap into it and seeing how it could be a gift is how it's been really helpful for me as a helping guide other people in their journeys and in their journeys.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And I guess just taking a step back for a second too, I just realized I really didn't know until you started writing about it that you had autism and ADHD, and like I witnessed you in the community as being someone doing amazing acro yoga and like posting amazing yoga pictures and being really amazing. I danced with you. I thought you were always like a really wonderful dancer. So it is, I think too, for me as someone learning about you, to how it brings up the question of how to be supportive, I guess, or something, how to not impose. I guess there's some fear comes up for me of like, I don't want to do or say the wrong thing for somebody, with autism or ADHD. So I think I just wanted to come back to that learning about you maybe could come from some personal place of how you want to be related to as someone with ADHD and autism.
Totally. And yeah, that's also why I said in the beginning, I fully acknowledge that I think sometimes worrying too much about getting it right with the language can prevent us from like learning about somebody with a different experience, because we can't learn until we know, right? So I'm not super particular about that, super understanding, but the ways that I think people can be supportive are simply educating yourself, as you're doing right now, is like a huge thing. I think that I know I spend a lot of time studying and learning how to communicate and relate in ways that are more natural for non-autistic, for neurotypical people, which is good because, of course, like I want to be able to connect with different kinds of people. That's important. But I think it's a lot more rare for neurotypical people or people without this same kind of difference to really like educate themselves and learn how to interact with us. So when they do, that's really really exciting and meaningful, whether or not you get it right at first. But one thing that's a really easy way to connect with somebody, if you know they're on the spectrum, is to simply ask them about their special interest. If they probably have one or a few, and also being mine, for example, are yoga and anime and human psychology. and we'll info dump, it's called, tons of details and all of the knowledge that we've collected on that subject. But it's also helpful to just be gentle and kind when moving on to the next topic, because we often don't realize how long we've been talking about a topic for. As I've been like checking my clock here, like as we're talking, trying to like see how long it's been. But the other thing is just to understand that every autistic person is super, super different. So like you're asking me about what's helpful for me, and that will be completely different for another person depending on their like unique combination of traits. So just asking is like the best thing that you can do with anyone. And for me personally, some other things that are really helpful are I have auditory processing delays and complex noise sensitivity. So it can be really helpful to have important conversations with people one-on-one or in quiet places. And I also have minor facial blindness, which means that I have a hard time recognizing faces. It's mild. So usually once I've like met you multiple times and we've had multiple conversations, like I'll have no problem. I'll like memorize like different traits. But if it's somebody I haven't met many times, I always tell people like in my yoga classes, it's really helpful if you come up and talk to me and remind me what your name is and how I know you. And then I'll like connect it and I'll connect it faster. Yeah, so just like being more open about stuff like that and being able to tell people how they could help support me and so we can support each other has been really, really profound and changed a lot. I used to have so much anxiety every time someone said hi to me because I couldn't remember if I knew them or not. Yeah.
That's helpful, very actionable too. And definitely taking away that different people on the spectrum are experiencing different things too, that not all of that's, or most of those things aren't universal, but are your experience. And that there's a type of listening I can do or asking that makes it easy to, opens up a bridge with someone on the spectrum. Maybe I can do a little bit of extra awareness or extra relationship building with that person once they've, in general. So just being aware of that. And I want to follow one of your advice you gave too, and ask you about one of your special interests too, which is I would like to hear about yoga and how that's unfolded for you in your life, how you got connected with it. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. All right. Where to start with yoga? I found yoga when I was in college studying biology and psychology, dual majors. So naturally, I was very stressed out. And I think yoga just really helped me to calm my mind. I remember vividly it being like the first time that my mind was quiet, which was so profound and not something that I got out of my other physical hobbies, of which I had many. And then through practicing over the years, it really dramatically helped with the social anxiety that I had long before I knew about anything about autism. It just helped me to like calm my nervous system, to be more present, all of the mindfulness stuff. And yeah, when it comes to diving deeper too, in when I became a teacher and started really studying yogic philosophy, what's really cool, fascinating about that is the actual definition of yoga in the Yoga Sutras is yoga is the stopping of the fluctuations of the mind. Yoga Sutra 1.2, Yoga Chitta Vrittis Nirodha. So that basically tells us that yoga is not more flexibility. It's not a specific posture. Although those things might come as added benefits, what the real goal and state of yoga is when the mind quiets. And in addition to that, my other favorite sutra, Sutra 1.12, Abhyasa Vairagya Vyam Tan Nirodha. I'm not as practiced at saying that one very well, but it basically means that practice and non-attachment are what brings about a state of yoga or brings about that quieting of the mind. And so it's this idea of constantly balancing, working towards a goal, and being unattached to achieving the goal, which is really simple in words, but obviously very, very, very hard to do, right? So in everything in life and in our practice, and what my practice has taught me is really having that approach of balance, of not needing to achieve perfection, but to work towards something steadily, and see where that ends up leading, because often you get a lot more benefits out of it than you originally intended. When I started practicing yoga, I just wanted to do handstands, and I got all kinds of things that I didn't ask for, that I'm so grateful for, like a lot less anxiety and a lot more peace.
Hey, Victoria, it's Ari here. I had a question on your yoga journey, specifically on teaching yoga. I know for me, the moment I started to teach yoga, I started to get a lot of lessons within myself, and I started to learn a lot more. It's like my yoga journey really began the moment I started to teach. Is there a yoga class or a lesson you've learned you'd like to share about right now?
Is there a lesson I've learned that I'd like to share through yoga?
Through teaching yoga or your own practice?
Mm-hmm. There are many. Let me consider for a moment which one stands out. I think one moment that comes to mind is you hear a lot of people talk about how the yoga mat is a metaphor for life, right? That's so true. And when you are noticing the things that come up when you're in uncomfortable positions, right, and you're working to breathe through them, it teaches you some interesting things about yourself. So specifically, I remember working on dropbacks, which is a movement we do in the style that I practice called Ashtanga yoga, where it's kind of like a back bend where you start from standing and you drop back. And standing up from one and then bursting into tears. And immediately trying to like put a story on why I was bursting into tears, like grasping for the reason. And I remember kind of coming back to my breath and just realizing like how quickly I wanted to make a story about that experience. That, oh, it must have been this thing that happened earlier in the day, or it's because this part of my body feels a weird way or something like that. And when I kind of just realized like, oh, whatever it was like something coming up, probably something being released. And I was able to kind of just like breathe and like move forward. I don't know, that moment has always stuck with me when I feel a thing and I immediately want to attach a story or an old story, like something that's happened in the past to it. But actually just like witnessing it as it is, witnessing the sensation as it comes and as it passes, versus holding on, because as soon as we attach a story to it, it's almost like we lock it in place. So yeah, that's one that stands out for me a lot.
That's really profound. And I can relate to that experience in yoga of the poses, the comfort and discomfort, the breath, all awakening emotions in me, or changing how I'm like seeing myself, or the awareness I feel of being alive, like this moving meditation of yoga. And I find it also extends out, like when I'm in my practice really strongly, it extends out to other moments in my day too, like how I relate to life itself. This idea of yoga is now. So something I love about yoga is you talked about the yoga philosophy, the sutras. I think these ideas are really important, really encourage people who are just doing the asana physical practice to get into the yoga sutras and the philosophy that Victoria is talking about. And then also, because then I think that philosophy to me helps make sense of this experience that I'm having in meditation or on the mat. So I can see I'm seeing how that happens for you too. There's a philosophy and a lived experience that really are serving you deeply. Yeah,
absolutely. I think philosophy without the practice of yoga isn't quite enough. You need this experiential experience of what's happening. But alternatively, the other way, and there's a lot more of this, I think, going on than the other way around, having just the physical practice without sort of some understanding of the philosophy and the reason why we practice, and having like a teacher who's kind of been on that path who can help guide you, you lose a lot of the awesome benefits. I think you'll still get a lot, but maybe not as many of the like deeper mind subtle benefits without some of that knowledge. So yeah.
You talked about starting out wanting to do these peak practices of the go for more handstands as being a driver for you. I know Art is also a peak pose guy, does a lot of awesome yoga poses. It's not exactly my style, but I've always been impressed by you too. But what place does that fit in the practice, like the performance of yoga or the extreme? Is there a balanced place for these extreme, the acro yoga, this expression? And it's kind of, there's a few different things I'm naming, but how does that look for you today?
Yeah. I would say that that's probably, it kind of depends on like what kind of, who you are when you come into the practice, right? I think for a lot of people like me who come in with like that more intensity, that like, I want to learn all the advanced postures and that, one thing that tells you something about yourself, right? Like the fact that I was showing up that way, definitely showed up in other ways in my life, in the way that I was more interested in the way that things looked than how they felt, and the deeper benefit of them. And I think that's okay. When you first come in, wherever you start is where you start. It's where you're at. So I wouldn't want to like make anyone to feel bad if like that's where they are at with it right now. But after many years of practice, it's interesting because while my physical practice has advanced, I can genuinely say that it's no longer really what's most interesting to me or what I'm like working towards. It's kind of like just like an added bonus that these things are coming along when they happen. I think like for me, I practice a more what people tend to think of as the more athletic style of yoga called Ashtanga. And I think it's more accessible than people think. But it is very challenging. And that's part of the work and the growth embedded into that practice. This older style is doing the hard work and again, relinquishing your attachment to ever necessarily achieving a place, right? But practicing because it's good for you, because you feel good when you do it. So developing greater mobility, and the peak postures that are there or these advanced postures are really just ways to like gauge your progress when it comes to like mobility and things, and putting yourself, as you achieve a certain level of athletic ability, you need more to continue to stay challenged. One of my favorite books about flow state talks about how in order to achieve a state of flow, you need to have a balance between how challenging the activity is. If it's too challenging, then you'll give up and you'll quit and you won't want to, and you won't be able to achieve that flow state. But if it's not challenging enough, then you'll lose interest, you'll stagnate, you'll be bored. And so really the postures in Ashtanga increasingly get more difficult just to allow us to continue to have something to work towards. But actually achieving the posture has nothing to do with yoga itself. It's the state of being in on the journey. And there was one other thing I wanted to say about something you asked about Ashtanga or about yoga. I also believe that there is a style and an approach to yoga that will work for everyone. So I'm not interested in deeming any style superior to the other. I think I am someone who's really, really have my ADHD traits. I'm really active. I'm really I have a lot of energy to use. And so this style that's like has a lot of physical exertion is really good for me. But I don't think that necessarily has to be the style for everybody. And I think that's important to say too. There's so many styles out there. So looking and finding the one that feels good for you is like what's important. And I'm not out here to say everybody should do Ashtanga. But if you do, come find me.
Maybe you could hear a little more about Ashtanga in a minute, but I just want to highlight something you said that affected me, which was the idea of setting goals, working towards a goal and releasing the outcome at the same time. Something I'm really working with is having these powerful goals. I think you gave a really good description of what the right kind of goals look like, where they're challenging but not too extreme. Mm-hmm. But then there's this idea of loving the process I have or loving the practicing for the sake of practice, but the practice asking for a goal, the practice needing a destination. It's this balance of I want to have a destination to go to, but I'm not attached to getting into this wild pose. Like I'm not judging myself. I'm not beating myself up if I'm not moving fast enough, or there's like some uh, wisdom in practice itself that the yoga explicitly teaches. It's in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita. They talk about releasing, accepting dharma, but releasing the outcome, uh, releasing, like surrendering to dharma in a way in the practice of being alive, of yoga. But has a very general understanding of it there. But yeah, it just seems like I just want to highlight it's a really powerful thought and something that I'm working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes having like a really clear, rigid goal can be paralyzing. And that just makes me think about, because I know one of the four gardens is creativity, so it makes me think about that, and the value of like not needing to fit an exact mold, because that can really sometimes impede the process of growth on whatever journey wherever we're trying to go.
I mean, I'll give an example of this that I'm trying to reclaim the primal squat position for myself. I'm just spending time every day in a squat as an example for me. So I set this goal of like, I really want to be able to, sit for 10 minutes in a squat comfortably and get really low. And just every day of getting, and also with balance, like another yoga goal I have is I'm doing balance poses to build up. And I have to do it every day to see progress. But it's like, I've just embraced that discomfort of that. I'm going to do that every day. And I don't, I guess I've just noticed a shift in my goal setting where it's been like, that has become rewarding in itself. Is just that little tiny bit of progress I notice each day in my body shifting is the satisfaction. And then even like being there and feeling alive in these poses is the payoff, not the eventually I'm going to be so flexible or so balanced. It's like the practice itself is the reward.
Yeah.
What I'm shifting towards, like feeling myself being there is the payoff. It's cool.
That's super, super beautiful. I love when I hear like people who were new to the practice kind of like reach that point and start explaining it in the same way. Because I think like that's what it's really about. And sometimes it takes a while to get there. Hearing that that's what it should feel like doesn't actually necessarily make you forget about wanting to achieve something, right? Like I can be like, I'm not attached to the goal, but for a long time, I think I was saying this before I actually felt it. But like you're saying, I feel it now in that each day when the things happen, it's like a bonus. Or when like something opens up, like an opening that I was kind of aiming for, more mobility somewhere, more open back bend, whatever. It's just the bonus, and the true nectar is in the, like you said, being in the body, being present, and feeling good.
Yeah, sometimes easier said than done for me too. I savor those moments where I can let go of the result or of my judgment, but there's still a lot of the time that I'm not in this in that kind of yogic detachment. But you mentioned creativity too, the creative garden, and I also admire what you create. You're clearly an artistic person. You are an artist and someone who's writing and expressing. So I'd like to hear about how creativity's been a healing practice for you, been part of this journey.
Totally. I believe that creativity is part of human nature and definitely essential for truly feeling fulfilled and healthy, as I know you've talked about in other episodes. And I think that also our intuition kind of speaks to us through our creativity. So again, if we're so rigid and perfectionistic, and this is coming from a recovering perfectionist, in our idea of what we're trying to create, then that can really be paralyzing and kind of cut off some of the benefits that can be gained from that. But for me in particular, finding yoga and conscious dance after college was kind of like rediscovering my creativity. I think I was really creative as a kid. And then when I went to college and I was studying the sciences, I kind of like cut that part out of myself off. I don't think anybody specifically said it, but I feel like I was getting this message that like those things weren't important and weren't respectable, which is silly. But rediscovering yoga, conscious dance, as well as like poetry and creating visual art, these things that I used to do when I was young, it really brought me out of a really long depressive episode that I had post-college, I think partially because I wasn't fostering that part of myself. So everything from visual art and fire spinning and different kinds of like movement art are things that are great because they allow me to just express without any expectation of what it will end up looking like. And I really, really value that sort of culture, which is one reason why I value Burning Man culture so much, which I'm getting ready to go to in a couple days also, by the way. So human spirit, human creativity.
You were saying at the beginning of the podcast too, how growing up you were hiding a lot. You weren't expressing yourself is what I was hearing, right? That you were quieting your real opinions and your real truth. Is that part of the healing in the last years? I notice you're now I see you as very expressed relatively to most people, of writing, of dancing, of photography. Has that been part of the healing, is being seen?
Yeah. Wow. Now that you point that out, I'm like, that's my answer actually. Well, so like when I was in high school through college, I like wouldn't dance in front of people at all. I was terrified of it. I remember crying at my high school prom because I was afraid to dance in front of people, which people who know me now, who have seen me on the dance floor, it probably would be shocking because I'm like the most crazy running around person there now. But yeah, I think that I was so paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong, of not doing it right. So then kind of being opened into some of those practices of like, of freedom was really, really healing. Like you said, allowing myself to express my like the way that I really wanted to move, the way that I really wanted to create.
You were saying too, I think it's a really beautiful insight that once you started getting into dance and yoga, I was hearing too, your creativity unlocked kind of with your body, with your like it all kind of happened together in a way. And I had the same experience too, getting into 5 rhythms and into yoga. It's really true how much the body creativity lives in the body for me, and the emotions too. So all this kind of, just wanted to like reflect how useful that is to keep in mind, that if I want to be more creative, I could be more embodied. If I want to be more embodied, I think finding more creativity and bringing creativity into my movement practices will work. So there's something really, really useful about that, I think, to reminder for me today.
Absolutely. So yeah. Major credit to Anne. 5 Rhythms did a lot for me.
Definitely. Check out Anne Kite's episode on here. People don't know Anne or want to learn more about Anne. Really great episode. I want to hear a little bit before we close about your work today, like how people can work with you and what some of your offerings to the community.
Absolutely. So my main offerings are yoga classes and private sessions, as well as virtual coaching related to wellness and neurodivergence, including autism, ADHD, highly sensitive people, synesthesia, stuff like that. However, I will be leaving in November to study Ashtanga yoga in Mysore, India for a few months, and then traveling after that. So I'm actually putting everything on hold right now so that I can really focus on my spiritual practice and learning. But if people want to find my writing and stay up to date with what I'm doing for when I do open up my offerings again, they can follow me at diary.of.a.yogi on Instagram. So that's diary of a yogi, just with a period in between every word. And you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, victoriawolfgang.com, where I'll probably be sending out blogs as I embark on these travels where I'm not sure where I'm going to end up. And if I did want to offer a couple of resources for people, because you asked about educating how you can be supportive to people on the spectrum. and like educating yourselves. And I think that, like, I know my answer was, educate yourself, but there's still so much misinformation on the internet that I think it'd be helpful just to like give people a good starting place. The Tony Attwood's website, Dr. Tony Attwood, is he's one of the world's leading experts in autism research, and he also takes a neurodiverse human first approach. So that's a really great place to start for up to date information. And there's also 2 really great books. One that I would recommend for anybody who is interested in learning more about neurodiversity in general is called Divergent Mind by Janara Nurenberg. And it covers all of those different expressions. And then Asperger's and Heals by Jennifer Cook is a really good one for women and girls on the spectrum, or if you know somebody and love somebody and you just want to learn more about it. So yeah, just some helpful resources in case you were interested by this conversation and want to learn more.
We will include those resources and links in the description below. So anyone who wants to check those out, that's all down, whether you're listening to this or watching it. You can check out each of those resources at your leisure. Yeah, I just want to see if there's anything else you wanted to add today before we wrap up. Any other question you'd like to be asked?
Well, just looking over my notes. I guess I just want to thank you for bringing me on the podcast to talk today, because it was definitely like a scary thing for me to talk about all of this. Even though I'm pretty open about stuff, I tend to like to write things down. So it was an honor to be invited and to have the opportunity to talk about it. And I also really want to thank some friends who have been there and been so supportive for me. I think that's like when you feel really different and kind of alone and in some ways, like something is wrong with you, having those people who like continuously are there to like remind you that you're loved and worthy can really make a big difference in somebody eventually like finding their way out of that place. And so the close friends that I've had throughout life, and TJ Matthews for encouraging me to do this, because I was very afraid to do it. And I'm in his house right now. So love to TJ. And that's it.
Thanks, TJ. And thanks to all the community, supportive community you have in your life. And I found this conversation to be very inspiring. So I'm really grateful you took the time to come on and help support this project and have a conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for this project and all the awesome people that you bring on that I learn from too.
That was my conversation with Victoria Wolfgang. As always, I'm joined by Ari Rubens again at the end to share a health tip. But before we do that, we both want to remind you to like and subscribe on this episode, leave a comment. Definitely just any kind of reaction you want to give it will help it grow. So please do that. And without further ado, Ari, let's take it away for a health tip.
I have a background as a personal trainer, but I've always sought continuing education. I eventually became an autism exercise specialist through ACSM. And I learned a lot of great tools to help anyone with autism or just anyone else looking to deepen mind-body connection. So exercise is super, super helpful for physical health, but also for cognitive health, cognitive function. So one of the greatest things I learned in that course was crossing the midline in order to sync both brain hemispheres. What does this mean? So when you bring your left arm up and cross it around the center of your body towards the right, you're bringing more synchronization between your brain, and that can lead to more mental clarity, mental focus. And I've experienced overall a more calm state. So when you're thinking about your exercise program, instead of going straight and back in one line, think about moving more dynamically, specifically with moving the arms across the middle line. And you'll find not only physical benefit, but a cognitive benefit.
Thank you as always for that tip, Ari. I appreciate learning with you. It's definitely a new idea for me I'd like to experiment with. And want to thank everybody out there for listening. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend this hour with us on the podcast. Keep on growing.